2:14 in the afternoon. A warning appears in the control room of a glass tower. Chilled water temperatures are beginning to rise. On the upper floors, residents and tourists have not noticed anything yet. The hotel suites remain cool. The elevators are still running. The city outside continues its normal rhythm, but the windows do not open. The glass facade continues to absorb the desert sun. And from the exact moment the mechanical cooling system stops removing heat, this luxurious shelter begins to transform into a solar oven. We often look at record-breaking tourism numbers and assume a city is invincible. But underneath the economic data lies a physical reality. The question is not whether Dubai can survive without air conditioning. The question is how long it can survive when the machines temporarily stop. The immediate aftermath of a cooling failure is silent. There is no sudden blast of hot air. The warning light on the building management system flashes, but the human experience remains unchanged for a brief window of time. This is because the massive volume of indoor air and the heavy building materials have been thoroughly cooled over time. The thermal mass holds on to that comfort, delaying the inevitable. For a tourist standing in a high-rise suite, looking out over the urban landscape, everything feels perfectly fine. The contrast between the harsh environment outside and the perfect climate inside is part of the luxury they paid for. But this comfort is an illusion sustained entirely by mechanical momentum. The heat is already waiting at the perimeter. Without the continuous operation of pumps, chillers, and fans, the invisible barrier between the desert and the living room is breached. The failure does not begin when the residents finally feel the sweat on their skin. The failure begins the exact moment the system stops fighting back. In many modern megacities, we have stopped designing buildings that can adapt to their environment naturally. Instead, we design hermetically sealed boxes and rely entirely on machines to make them habitable. When those machines are running, these glass towers are marvels of engineering. However, the very design that maximizes panoramic views also maximizes vulnerability. A hotel room that relies 100% on artificial climate control is no longer just a room. It is a highly engineered life support capsule. To understand the scale of the trap, we must follow the energy. Consider a single ray of sunlight striking the western facade of a luxury hotel at 3 in the afternoon. When this intense solar radiation hits the glass, a portion is reflected back into the atmosphere. Another portion is absorbed by the glass itself, physically heating the pane, but a crucial percentage passes directly through the transparent barrier and enters the room. Once inside, this shortwave radiation hits the carpets, the furniture, and the walls. It is absorbed by these materials and re-radiated as long-wave heat energy. This newly created heat cannot easily pass back out through the glass. It is effectively trapped inside the envelope. This is the fundamental greenhouse effect, happening inside tens of thousands of rooms simultaneously across the city. To prevent the room from reaching dangerous temperatures, the mechanical cooling system must continuously collect this heat and move it back outside. It is a relentless, energy-intensive battle against basic thermodynamics. The glass facade is beautiful, offering the spectacular views that drive the tourism market. But it also creates an enormous cooling load that must be managed every single day. Internal blinds offer some visual relief, but they only block the light after the energy has already crossed the threshold. The heat is already inside. Engineers utilize double or triple glazing to reduce the thermal transfer. Yet a transparent wall in a desert climate will always remain a thermal liability. The building must actively fight its own design. This architectural choice dictates the entire infrastructure of the city, forcing the construction of massive power plants just to maintain the status quo. If the temperature inside your home begins to rise uncontrollably, your first natural instinct is to open a window. You want to create a cross breeze to let the building breathe and release the trapped thermal energy. But what happens if the building was never designed to allow you to do that? In many of the iconic high-rises that define the skyline, windows are permanently sealed shut. There are very valid engineering and safety reasons for this decision. Strict safety regulations at extreme heights prevent operable windows to protect occupants against powerful wind currents. Sealed facades also keep out fine dust and urban noise, ensuring a pristine environment for high-paying tourists. The entire interior space is optimized to work in perfect harmony with central air conditioning. When the machinery is functioning smoothly, this creates an exceptionally comfortable environment. But when the machinery stops, the lack of operable windows removes the only alternative for survival. The building cannot breathe. The occupants find themselves trapped inside a sealed container that is actively absorbing solar radiation. This is where the architectural trade-off becomes starkly visible. We have traded the ability to passively adapt to the local climate for the absolute control provided by mechanical systems. Modern urban planning largely discarded traditional methods like thick walls and small windows in favor of sheer volume and uninterrupted sightlines. For a tourism industry built on aesthetics and supreme comfort, this makes perfect economic sense in the short term. Guests demand unobstructed views of the city skyline, but this consumer demand fundamentally alters the risk profile of the urban environment. When the cooling system fails, the luxury suite rapidly transforms into a thermal liability. It would be entirely unfair and factually incorrect to suggest that the city is constantly on the verge of a catastrophic blackout. In fact, the exact opposite is true. The local utility authority operates one of the most reliable power grids in the world. According to official data from the Dubai Electricity and Water Authority, the average customer minutes lost is incredibly low, sitting around 0.82 minutes. That translates to roughly 49 seconds of power interruption per customer per year. This astonishing level of reliability is a monumental engineering achievement. It definitively proves that the city does not maintain its climate control through a fragile electrical network. The government has invested billions to ensure the power keeps flowing seamlessly, even as peak electricity demand continues to surge past 11,300 megawatts. The infrastructure is robust and highly redundant. So, is the entire story about the greenhouse trap just an exaggeration designed to generate fear? No, because it is precisely this incredible, unwavering reliability that creates the hidden danger we are investigating. A system that almost never fails quietly conditions everyone to assume it will never fail. Architects confidently design buildings with the absolute certainty that chilled water and electricity will always be available. Developers build entire sprawling districts based on the premise of endless climate control. Tourists book expensive vacations in July, trusting implicitly that the indoor environment will remain perfect. The sheer reliability of the grid gradually removes all economic incentives to design for failure. If power outages were common, buildings would be forced to incorporate passive cooling and natural ventilation. Because the power grid is virtually perfect, those crucial fail-safes are deemed unnecessary. The perfection of the macro infrastructure perfectly masks the vulnerability of the micro-architecture, allowing the city to construct structures fundamentally unsuited for the raw climate. This brings us directly to the core of the issue, which is the dependency trap. High reliability is not a problem in and of itself. The problem emerges when the design of the city loses its secondary layers of environmental protection. It quickly becomes a self-reinforcing cycle that is incredibly difficult to break. Reliable air conditioning allows for the construction of more sealed, glass-heavy buildings that maximize real estate value. These sealed buildings create a massive, inflexible demand for more cooling. To meet this absolute demand, the infrastructure must be constantly expanded, making the entire city even more dependent on the cooling network. This cycle ensures that the city functions beautifully on a day-to-day basis, but it also means there is absolutely no going back. This is not a loop of failure, but the loop of a spectacular success that is becoming increasingly difficult to live without. And this is exactly where the architectural reality collides violently with the economic reality of the modern tourism industry. The city is often celebrated for experiencing record numbers of international visitors, but record arrivals at the airport do not automatically mean every hotel or tourism business is thriving financially. The cost of running these massive artificial climates is truly staggering. Hotels face immense utility bills just to keep their grand lobbies habitable during the long summer months. When global economic pressures affect tourist spending habits, these fixed operational costs do not drop. The cooling must continue at full capacity, regardless of occupancy rates. To maintain profitability, these massive costs are passed on to the consumer, making the destination far more expensive. The dependency on mechanical cooling is no longer just an engineering challenge. It is a heavy financial anchor tied to every business. To truly understand the sheer scale and complexity of this dependency, we have to look away from the glittering skyline and go deep underground. Beneath the pristine streets lies a hidden network that literally keeps the city alive. This is the district cooling system. Instead of every individual building having its own independent air conditioning units on the roof, central plants chill massive volumes of water. This freezing water is then pumped through a vast network of insulated underground pipes directly into multiple buildings and hotels. Inside the buildings, the chilled water absorbs the heat from the indoor air. The now warmer water flows back to the central plant to be cooled all over again. It is an industrial-scale, closed loop of relentless thermal management. The city has aggressively expanded this infrastructure, aiming to meet 40% of its total cooling demand through district cooling by the year 2030. From a pure engineering standpoint, this centralized approach is significantly more energy efficient than running thousands of standalone chillers. It noticeably reduces the strain on the electrical grid and helps to lower overall carbon emissions. But it also reveals a profound and unsettling truth about the nature of the city. Cooling is no longer just an appliance in the corner of a room. It is a macro-level urban utility, as fundamental to survival as running water. The sheer size of these chilled water plants is staggering to behold, and while district cooling is highly efficient, it creates a completely new kind of systemic risk. It tightly intertwines the fate of dozens of skyscrapers into a single mechanical network. A severe disruption at a central plant does not just affect one isolated building. It compromises an entire urban district simultaneously. For the tourism sector, this means the operational risk is heavily centralized. A major luxury hotel cannot simply fix its own air conditioning if the entire district network goes down. It is a fundamental law of thermodynamics that energy cannot be destroyed. Air conditioning does not magically eliminate heat from existence. It merely displaces it from one location to another. The massive compressors and industrial fans require tremendous amounts of electrical energy to extract thermal energy from inside a building and dump it outside. This means every artificially cooled room is actively contributing to making the outdoor environment even hotter. The heat is exhausted into the ambient air through rooftop cooling towers. When the outside temperature rises naturally, the mechanical process of rejecting heat becomes physically harder and far less efficient. The system has to work significantly harder, consuming even more electricity, which in turn generates even more waste heat. In the wider region of the United Arab Emirates, extensive research has estimated that cooling can account for roughly 40% of the average electrical load. This number can spike to an astonishing 60% during the peak summer months. The city has simply built a colossal, energy-hungry machine to continuously push the heat away from where the people are spending their money. This creates a stark physical division in the urban experience. Inside, the climate is beautifully curated and perfectly comfortable. Outside, the expelled heat compounds the extreme natural temperatures, making the streets increasingly hostile for pedestrians. This spatial divide has profound implications for the nature of tourism. It forces the visitor experience almost entirely indoors, severely limiting the authentic exploration of the city. Tourists move seamlessly from air-conditioned hotels to air-conditioned vehicles to air-conditioned megamalls. While this specific model has been incredibly successful at attracting visitors seeking luxury, it is remarkably expensive to sustain over time. The immense economic weight of this continuous thermal management is rarely discussed in traditional tourism marketing materials. The beautiful illusion of a temperate oasis requires a constant, massive, and unforgiving injection of capital and energy to maintain its boundaries. This critical question brings us to the concept of passive survivability. It is a technical term used to describe how long a building can maintain safe conditions during an extended loss of power or mechanical cooling, a stress test that few developers want to discuss publicly. The speed at which a building heats up and becomes dangerous depends on a highly complex matrix of factors. The orientation of the apartment, the ratio of glass to solid wall, the airtightness of the envelope, and the available thermal mass all play a crucial role. There is no single universally agreed upon number for every building in the city. International studies on buildings located in hot climates show that apartments with heavy glass exposure on the western facade will experience a rapid spike in interior temperatures. In a simulated scenario of a total cooling failure during a peak summer afternoon, the first hour might seem entirely manageable. But as the radiant heat accumulates, the grim reality of the sealed box finally sets in. The air becomes completely stagnant and heavy. The radiant heat from the warm glass panels begins to act exactly like a giant indoor radiator. For a luxury hotel packed tightly with international tourists, the situation would quickly escalate from a mild inconvenience to a severe health hazard. Without the physical ability to open windows for cross-ventilation, the indoor temperature can eventually surpass the outdoor temperature. This happens because the building effectively traps the body heat generated by the occupants themselves. You have to ask yourself a deeply uncomfortable but critical question. Do you judge a building's true quality by how cold it gets when every single system is working perfectly? Or do you judge its quality by how long it protects you when absolutely everything shuts down? The solution is not to simply turn off the air conditioning in the desert, as that is neither practical nor safe. The actual solution is to build structures that do not become entirely useless the exact second the machines stop operating. We must deliberately design architecture that has the capacity to fail safely. This involves acknowledging that mechanical systems should always be the second line of defense, not the first and only one. The very first step is stopping the heat before it ever enters the building envelope. This means a necessary return to extensive exterior shading, drastically reducing the percentage of glass on sun-facing facades, and utilizing advanced materials that reflect solar radiation. The second crucial step is keeping the building safe and habitable for a much longer period during an emergency. This involves mandating high-performance envelopes, strategically placing thermal mass to absorb heat, and the intelligent integration of controlled natural ventilation. The city is not entirely blind to this growing issue. The local municipality has actively implemented green building rating systems which mandate specific requirements for thermal insulation and overall cooling efficiency. These regulations clearly prove that the government recognizes the engineering challenge and is actively managing building performance standards. Furthermore, the city is heavily investing in large-scale thermal energy storage, allowing chilled water to be produced efficiently at night when power is cheaper. This smart strategy reduces the immense strain on the electrical grid and builds a much-needed buffer into the overall system. However, the sheer volume of existing heavily glazed towers means the physical legacy of the dependency trap will remain a challenge for decades. True urban resilience demands that we rigorously measure the heating rate of individual apartments and establish strict passive survivability targets for all new developments across the entire region. There is one final, often overlooked dimension to this dependency trap, and it involves the human cost of maintaining the illusion. The massive cooling infrastructure creates a stark thermal divide within the city itself. Inside the sealed glass towers, tourists and wealthy residents experience a perpetually perfect, artificially curated spring. But this pristine indoor environment does not run on its own. It requires a vast, invisible workforce to maintain it. The delivery drivers navigating the scorching asphalt, the maintenance crews servicing the rooftop chillers, and the technicians monitoring the district cooling pipes all exist on the other side of the glass. While the indoor population is shielded from the climate, the outdoor workforce absorbs the brunt of both the natural extreme heat and the mechanical exhaust heat pumped out by the buildings. This creates a deeply unequal urban experience that the glossy brochures carefully edit out. The luxury of the sealed environment is effectively subsidized by the physical endurance of those working outside. As the city pushes for even more ambitious tourism targets and constructs larger mega-projects, the demand for this outdoor labor will only intensify. This hidden vulnerability proves that true sustainability is not just about power grids. The ultimate paradox of the greenhouse trap is not just that it traps heat, it is that the absolute protection for those inside relies entirely on the relentless exposure of those outside. Air conditioning is undeniably a miraculous technology. It protects human health, drives unprecedented economic growth, and makes modern urban life entirely possible in some of the most extreme climates on Earth. The city has undeniably proven its exceptional ability to build and maintain an incredibly reliable power and cooling network. The core story here is not a sensationalist prediction of an imminent apocalyptic blackout. Rather, it is a careful look at the profound hidden costs of absolute environmental control. It is the story of magnificent buildings that have traded their structural independence for visual luxury, becoming entirely reliant on an energy-hungry support system. As the global tourism market becomes significantly more competitive, maintaining this perfect thermal illusion will require ever-increasing amounts of capital. The economic pressure is largely invisible to the tourist eye, but it is constant and unyielding. Perhaps the ultimate measure of a sustainable city is not how flawlessly it operates when every single mechanical system is running perfectly. Perhaps the true measure is the length of time it can continue to protect its people when one of those critical systems finally disappears. The lingering, deeply unsettling question is whether its magnificent buildings could survive in the quiet silence of the very machines that made them possible. This documentary provides an analytical look at building dependency on mechanical cooling systems, based closely on publicly available data and established architectural principles. The opening scenario is a technical simulation designed purely to explain thermodynamic concepts, not a report of an actual power failure. The real-world passive survivability of any structure varies greatly depending on its specific design, materials, and local conditions. This analysis focuses on systemic urban trends and does not constitute financial, travel, or real estate investment advice. If you value investigations that look beyond the glossy tourism brochures and carefully examine the physical realities of our modern cities, please consider subscribing for more content.